Hello, this is Sam Jahari from AllPointsTV.com coming to you live from for Briona's Legacy, Slaying the Dragon. And today we have a special guest, Kristen Senters from the Odyssey House. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you.
Kristen, just remind us what your job title or what you do over at the Odyssey House.
The job title is Director of Public Relations, Program Development, and Women's Specialty Services Standards.
What exactly is that?
Well, as you can imagine, substance abuse is a very complex issue. And so one of the things that I do is public relations is things like this, being able to do advocacy, support, a little bit of marketing in there. But basically just really looking at ways to reduce some of the stigma about substance abuse services and to find out those ways that we can support access to services. That's the biggest, is to remove any barriers to be able to have services. In the state of Michigan, pregnant women specifically, are a priority for treatment. And so we want to make sure that pregnant and postpartum women know that they have immediate access to services, and then making sure that nobody is denied services that they need. Then program development is about, again, engaging in things like this, but being able to meet with the public and other stakeholders and finding out what we need to add and what we need to modify and what sort of services are not available, and then looking at putting those into place. We just started some prevention programming based on that, and looking at the idea that we needed to build up some family supports and communication and sort of cut the problem off before it starts. And then women's specialty services, there are specific standards in the state regarding pregnant, postpartum, parenting women and men, because we serve men under women's specialty, we serve men too, but that's that advocacy piece. And looking at making sure that we meet those standards so that we maintain our designation as a statewide resource for that.
So the Odyssey House is primarily for ladies or for women, unless they're pregnant or something's going on with their mate.
Well, no, we serve men and women equitably.
Okay.
We do have specific funding for pregnant and parenting women. We are what's called a state designated program for women's specialty services. And there are not a lot of programs that do that. And we are one of 10 programs really in the country that serve pregnant and parenting women at the extent that we do. We take women who have children up to the age of 17 with any number of children, so that a mother does not have to decide whether or not her family or her treatment should come first.
I see. Great. I just want to bring everybody up to speed. I lost a daughter 5 years ago to a heroin overdose. Mm-hmm. And after I lost my daughter, as I started speaking out, it seemed like I was getting letters and cards from all over the state, telling me this is happening in their home. And I realized that there's an epidemic going on here. As a father, when I was going through this, I really was quiet. I didn't want nobody to know what was happening in my home. I was embarrassed and, humiliated and stuff like that. But afterwards, it was like you couldn't shut me up. I wanted to tell the world, we have a problem going on. And I don't see this problem really going anywhere. I think it seems like it's getting worse and worse every time we turn on the TV or the newspapers or something. They're talking about this heroin and opiate overdoses. Now, even not only the overdoses, but you're seeing a lot of doctors that are going to jail because they're overprescribing. Mm-hmm. It's crazy, but 2020 just did a special, I think about a month ago or a couple weeks back. CBS has done something. It's crazy. Do you see that this thing is, are we getting a handle on it?
Well, from the way our census looks, and that we've actually had to expand capacity. We have extra rooms in not only our Flint program, but our Saginaw program, actually. I would say no. But again, it could be just that we've worked really hard to expand access to services. So But from those of us at the field, it doesn't look like the problem's going away. I think we are getting a better handle on some of the issues that lead into the addiction problem that we have. One of the things I've been very happy to hear is that we see more and more doctors that are holding other doctors accountable. So that peer accountability piece is coming in, because we have had some pretty, I guess you could say, I'm trying very hard not to refer to a medical professional as a drug dealer, but we have had some doctors that have been really overprescribing and contributing to the problem.
Exactly. Well, that's just it. You know, if as a person, when they get a prescription for opiates, you know, they feel like, well, this was given to me by a doctor. I'm not doing anything wrong. But as it takes over their life, you know, a lot of times the doctor, he pretty much, okay, well, now I know you're an addict. I'm not going to prescribe anymore because, you know, a week ago you lost your prescriptions, or you got to write another one,
Right.
or the games that they play.
Right.
You know, well, what happens is there's a lot of these addicts, when this is taken over their life, they do anything and everything to get their drugs. Mm-hmm. They actually go over to the other side and start doing things illegally, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I noticed that as a country, we're trying to work towards treatment instead of locking people away. Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've noticed is that we have many different specialty courts. There's even a veteran specialty court. So to make sure that we're looking at whether or not we're putting people where they're best served. Now, I'm not saying that we should do away with prisons altogether, but that we're not solving the problem unless we actually allow treatment as a viable option to incarceration.
2020, they did this special, you know, and they had this girl or this couple. They were both addicts, and the one was trying to get off, you know, the heroin, and there was some kind of drug that they had to take. And it was given to them on a daily basis. It was like $12 or $14, and they were scraping up the money, you know,
Right.
to get to this. Do you know what that drug is by any chance?
I wouldn't know what, by the price point, I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is. I do know that they have options. There's even one that's a monthly injection. And so there are options for medicated assisted therapies. And you just brought up an important part of that, is that, you know, we want to solve the problem, and that we have had in the state of Michigan with the Medicaid expansions and the Healthy Michigan plan, should be able to have where the availability of those medications is available to people, that scraping up $10 or $15 a day to be able to take the medication to not use. Then there are those of us who would argue that heroin was a bit more expensive, and if you
Sure.
could scrape up for that, you could scrape up for your other. But I mean, we do need to make a commitment to saying that if we are going to make these forms of treatment available, that they really should be available.
Exactly. Well, I noticed that for the first time, it seems like they're on the same lingo that this is a sickness. Mm-hmm. Addiction is a brain disease or a sickness of some sort, and we should start treating it more like a sickness than the criminal aspect of it.
Well, right, and there are people that still make very strong moral judgments about people who use. And looking at the idea that, you know, there was no brain disease technically before starting to use, but there is something very, very true to the fact that once your brain is addicted, it's addicted. And looking at it, I view addiction as a attempt to solve something else. And whether that was attempting to solve trauma, attempting to solve a mental health issue, attempting to solve social anxiety. A lot of the kids who begin using start using because it makes them feel better and feel more confident around their peers. And then what happens is that they're predisposed and they become addicted, and some of their peers don't. And so they quit, and then you have somebody who's needs more and more and more to feel normal in those kind of situations. I mean, we saw that back prior to the heroin addiction with alcohol and marijuana, and I mean, it's not a new process to see how, especially young adults or teenagers, get involved in that process. Besides being prescribed medication for, again, sports injuries. I was prescribed Vicodin for having a tooth removed. They handed it to me, and I couldn't get it filled, which I was actually kind of happy to see, but I couldn't get it filled in the city of Flint. It's because many pharmacists have had those levels of prescriptions. And then Vicodin, of course, over a long time, it causes other kind of problems. So one of the pharmacists I talked to was saying that so many of their customers were now on dialysis due to this long time high doses of Vicodin, that they didn't carry it anymore. They saw they saw that prescribing as a health risk. So kudos to the pharmacist that stood up and said, no, we're not going to carry this. There's other options, and holding, again, doctors responsible for their prescribing practices.
That's awesome.
I was really happy to see it. I was, granted, my face was all swollen up, and I was, but I wanted to test the system. I wanted to see. And so I went to 7 different pharmacies around Flint.
Well, let me ask you, how long was your prescription for?
It was, right, and it was a 30-day prescription for Vicodin that I needed 2 Tylenol to resolve. But again, I wanted to test that system out because I had heard people talking, and I'm like, I want to see if this is true, because I look like general, middle class America. So I wanted to test it out to see if it was really true, and it was. So I was happy to see that one.
Yeah, that's great.
So we won one. We might not have won the whole war, but at least that was a small piece of the battle. But
here's another thing too. You got a 30-day prescription for something that you're going to be
a tooth that was pretty much coming out on its own. I know.
And you were going to be maybe in pain for a couple days or a week, if that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
where the problem ends up happening. With certain people, they could take it for a couple days and they can just say, okay, I'm done, throw it out or leave it in their medicine cabinet.
Right.
But other people, it takes over their life.
Right. Well, and other people may take over your medicine cabinet if they know that you have, which is why I'm so happy with so many of the drug take-back initiatives that there are, because there are over-prescriptions. We've all done it. We've all gotten a 30-day prescription for something, taken 3 and left 27 there, just in case someday we might. And that puts your medicine cabinet or and so many people do it too. They have it in the kitchen, in the cupboard above their stove. Mm-hmm. I mean, people know where you have this, and so that makes it where it's accessible for young people.
Why do you think they prescribe it for 30 days?
Well, I've heard a couple of different arguments, and one of them is that, and I recognize this as another problem, is that we have many people who are on limited incomes. If you have a copay to have a medication filled, your copay is that copay regardless of how many pills there are in the bottle, or how long that prescription is for. So if they give you in one bottle a 30-day supply, your copay is the same as if they gave you a 3-day supply. And so in many ways, especially those who are on limited income, who really do need that, it's just become the habit in saying, well, if 3 days isn't enough for you and you're going to want a refill, you're going to have to pay double the copay. And so part of that is because patients have complained. My father-in-law was on, he had cancer repeatedly and was on different medications, and he had 90-day prescriptions. So it was a pill with 90 days because of the length of time that he was taking these things. And the copays for that, which when you have a copay that's $25, that's substantial.
Sure.
If you're filling that on a limited income with somebody that's elderly.
That seems like it's getting more and more expensive too, that copay.
Yes.
Well, I understand on something like that.
Right.
Okay. Now, for your 3 days or a week.
Right. We're back to prescribing practices, and the entire medical field.
Does the doctor make more money to give you for a longer period of time, or the 3 pills, or?
I'm not. I don't think the doctor does. I do think the doctor is looking at, they have patients, and their patients need to come in more than once for that to be a business. It is a for-profit business. And so you need repeat customers that you're not going to get you in trouble for libel or some other practices. So, I mean, it's, I'm not saying they get, like a kickback per pill, but there is something to say that they want to keep you happy and keep you coming back in, because that's how they make their money. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I think that more and more doctors are seeing that there's a certain population it's not worth the cost, because there are some very, very real problems with being able to have somebody that you're not prescribing correctly for, that is drug seeking, and that more and more doctors are holding each other accountable, so that you do have more and more losing their licensure and not being able to practice, which is wonderful. That was something we didn't even see. Peer reviews are required now for substance abuse facilities or any facilities if they're. But peer reviews on medication prescribing are required, and we didn't see that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and everything's now on the computer. And
right.
So that's awesome. When I was going through this, Kristen, which was 5 years ago, but I remember my daughter. She had gotten hemorrhoids really bad from the opiates, obviously, which I didn't realize the side effects of all these, but now I see, if you have opiate, hemorrhoids, now they're advertising.
Opiate-induced constipation.
Yeah.
During the Super Bowl and some of the other football games.
Well, I remember my daughter had went and seen our family doctor, and she was kind of rude to his nurse, I get a letter from my doctor, and he says, your daughter can't come here anymore. As a doctor, you would think that they would know more about treating addiction or what's going on with this child of mine, that she's irritable probably because she needs to use, and then she's got hemorrhoids on top.
Right.
And I don't know, that oath, to treat, it seemed like, I'm pissed off because she didn't treat my nurse right or something, and she can't come here anymore. Right.
And unfortunately, addiction is not required to earn medical licensure. Actually, an addictionologist is a specialty. My understanding from talking, and there's not enough of them, there's not enough addictionologists in the state. My understanding from talking to several of them, and I'm not one, so I don't know the process, but that paying the extra for school and paying the extra for that standard actually reduces their ability to make money. And I'm not sure how that works, because it seems counterintuitive to me. But many have talked about, I actually can bill less by having this extra that I paid for and had. So again, that was a couple of years ago that I was talking to an addictionologist about that, and I'm hoping that process is changing too, because we do want to make sure that we have medical personnel that have a really good understanding of addiction, that have a really good understanding of not only how that process works, but also in treating and all the side effects, and how to support somebody through all the side effects of withdrawal and recovery, and to make sure that they're treating holistically rather than just detoxing.
I was watching Dancing with the Stars the other day.
Okay.
My wife, she loves that show, so I gotta to spend time with her. I gotta watch it. Anyways, the girl from Full House was on there, and she was talking about after they ended the Full House series. Right. She said, I felt like I lost my family, and I turned to drugs and alcohol, and, she's been clean and sober for 5 years. But that's what you were talking about, like dramas that happen in people's lives, because I was looking at my daughter's diary, and it was after her mom died, and she's talking to her mom like, why did you leave me? Why couldn't you have kicked the habit, Why didn't you love me more than that drug? Right. Is pretty much what she's saying. And I had Briona going to therapy and stuff. She didn't show me that side until after she died, and I started looking through everything of hers. And I seen she was really in a lot of pain. Mm-hmm. even the therapist that I had her seeing, it was more that they were trying to deal with her getting in trouble at school or stuff like that, and not really dealing with what was really going on in her, and it seemed like I'm just a father. I'm not a specialist, but that's their specialty, and that's why I had her going to therapy, to help her deal with this stuff. But I think that's what happens when people are in pain. They want to cover it up. That it ends up just overpowering them.
Right, and like you said, that being able to look at addiction coming as out of the grief and loss, rather than having it as a brain disorder, and then not even either knowing how to process that, and again looking at the idea you had mentioned is that why did my mother choose this drug over me? In the adolescent mind, then it becomes, so what's so great about this drug? Maybe I should try it. It will help me connect to my parents. And there's this, I guess you could say, prefrontal thinking, where that becomes a curiosity.
Yeah.
And so they want to get to know that person more through this shared experience. And adolescents, their forebrains aren't developed. Yeah, I mean, that really doesn't get fully developed until the age of 25. So we know that there's some poor decision making and logic that happens in the process, and being able to look at somebody who's going through. I met a woman who actually specialized in doing grief counseling for survivors of family members who had overdoses, for that complete purpose, that they were doing some research. It was Eastern Michigan University, and they were doing some research with families, specifically siblings, to make sure that there was an option that was specialized, because many people hold very strong judgments in saying, well, my son was killed while serving our country, and yours just wasted their life. So attending other kinds of survivor groups wasn't beneficial, because again, the stigma, the guilt, the shame, all those feelings that I'm sure you're familiar with trying to process. And so having that specialty group and looking at long-term options to say, are we able to then circumvent other siblings following in that path, other family members, friends of somebody that's overdosed, and to ensure that we don't have a repetitive problem, because as you know, that's a concern, and I know you have younger children, so I'm sure that was another concern, was we do not want a repeat pattern. And I'm very glad you did not stay quiet.
Well, when you lose somebody, it's your heart gets ripped from inside, and it's hard to recover. And I think my main purpose was, when I realized that this is going on, that I didn't want no other family to go through what I went through. Through the whole time, I turned my daughter to a system that I thought they were the specialists, or they knew what was happening, how to deal with her. And I realized they didn't really have a clue.
Well, part of that, and again, I'm part of that system. And I think I have a clue. One of the things is that I think, and I'm not going to say there's everybody has a full and complete understanding. Specifically, as you mentioned, when the school makes a referral for behavior problems, the person that you're sending them to may not have certification experience in addiction. And we have a tendency to think that that's like adults, and it's a specialty population.
Sure.
I come from the perspective from doing family counseling with adolescents before, and I swore I would never go into drug treatment. I did. I had substance abusers in the family and stuff like that, and I swore no way was I going to go to work every day and deal with drug addicts. And I think because I've said that repeatedly, the universe has a sense of humor, and that's exactly why I'm here. But one of the things I found in doing family sessions with the adolescents that I was working with, that despite my protest that somebody with an addiction, whether it be a chemical addiction or some kind of process addiction, I was treating. So I might as well go get the skills that I needed so that I could be effective in that process. So I didn't even take my first substance abuse course until my master's program because I swore up and down no way. And I think that that's very common. What I also see is that more and more colleges are requiring that as part of the core requirements, offering more options, that they're even offering substance abuse services as a minor, which wasn't even an option. It was maybe an elective course back when I was going through school. And so we see that that's considered something that's just standard, which is nice. We're educating our workforce better. But also, we're building a different frame of reference when we're looking at people, instead of staying in little corners and this is not my specialty. Really recognizing that human beings are very complex and they have complex problems, and that our education then needs to be very, very varied. And that's, again, holding each other accountable and being able to build. So I'm hoping that looks like it's getting better. I know that and also it used to be at one time that you would have what we call paraprofessionals, that were people who had experience in addiction, who had been in a sustained recovery, and that they could get certified. And then you had people that were coming through college and that had all the college credentials, and that depending on what kind of insurance you had, that insurance may not cover somebody who was in sustained recovery. They were not considered equitable. Now I see more and more people who have been through recovery, who had even criminal histories, being hired and being part of the workforce. We have recovery coaches now that are part of the workforce. We have, we're just starting a program now, parenting advocates through the Enhanced Women's Specialty Services, which are women who are in sustained recovery and parents of young children, and understand that and being able to work with the clinicians and the other team to make sure that we have extra supports. And so I think that our workforce is now being more varied, that you don't have this 45 minutes in an office, you sit on your chair, I sit in my chair, and we process. It's become multifaceted and more willing to refer, and more options. Funders have gotten a little bit more open in paying for some things specifically.
We covered this a little bit ago, but I wanted to share something with you. When I found out Briona was doing heroin, I confronted her with it. And at the time, I think she was 15 years old. And I asked her, I says, "You've seen your mom die of this. Mm-hmm. Why would you even try it?" Mm-hmm. And that was her answer to me was, I wanted to know what was so good about this drug mm-hmm. that kept my mom away. Right. Then, it was her boyfriend that turned her on to this, but I think her psychological thinking was, I'll show this boy that, hey, we'll do it once and we can get off of it, that.
And I couldn't save my mother, so I'll save you.
Yeah. It's a crazy way of thinking, but, I appreciate mm-hmm. that you bringing that to our attention, too, that our brain is still developing until the age of 25. Mm-hmm. And it's weird. I'm sure we've all had some family members that did drugs in their days or whatever. One of my best friends growing up, he's got, I think, a brain of a 13 or 14-year-old. And he's never gone past that, even though he's almost 60 years old. But the way he thinks, it's like you just look at him sometimes and you say, oh my God. You never gone any further than that.
Right. And you're not the only one with friends and family that sometimes wonder. Despite having professionals in the family. But right, the earlier the exposure, that does prohibit, alcohol specifically prohibits brain development. And some of these others, we don't even really know the long-term effects. Oxycontin was developed as a hospice drug. It was originally tested for people in hospice. So having exposure to that drug when you're in your teens, and now I think the prescribing, they lowered it to something like 12 or 13 that you could prescribe OxyContin for. we don't know what the long-term effects are because
Yeah.
we haven't had enough time to study to see what the long-term effects are for beginning to take that at 14 and then what happens at 28, 29, 30, 40, 60.
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't even considered to be one
Right.
of these things that you would think about.
You know, I was watching Dr. Gupta on CNN, and he had a special, and it was about the drugs and stuff. And that's what he said. He said, you know, a lot of these opiates, they were used for people that were dying.
Right.
So we really didn't know what the long-term effect. Then the drug company says, hey, we're losing a lot of money here on these. Let's start treating people for pain.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden now we're flooded with this, and we see the after effects of addiction. I mean, that's just getting worse and worse. Detroit Free Press did an article about, you know, drug overdoses. We've lost more people to drug overdoses than car accidents. You know, in 2014, they said in 1999 we had 99 overdoses that people died, and in 2014 it was over 1,800. That's just crazy. You know, the percentage of this is just over flooding, and it doesn't seem like it's getting any less. Even though we're having a lot of, you know, coalitions coming up in every town, it seems like, you know, to fight overdoses and heroin and opiate overdoses. You know, the Narcan, all these things that are coming out, and it seems like the more and more death every year happens from overdoses. I don't know what you know, how can we start lessening this, you know, where we see. Now I know for heroin they say 3 to 5% of people that ever get rid of that or come out of that addiction. Is that about right? 3 to 5%, or do you see better?
Oh, I see much better than that.
Much
better than it. And again, I think that part of that is sort of following the path that you did, which is making sure that you're talking, making sure that there's conversations that are open, pushing the limit, demanding change and demanding, because let's face it, insurance companies are for-profit businesses, and they're going to initially offer the least amount of services that they can because they don't make money if you're using the insurance. So demanding when they tell you, you know, we don't approve of this or we're not going to honor that claim. One of the things is to start demanding to, you know, well, who's the one that did that denial? There's a process of recipient rights to go through so that you can demand more appropriate treatment. Not stopping with the first no. Asking more and more for wraparound services and long term. One of the things the new programming we have, the Enhanced Women's Specialties, it's 3 years of follow-up and case management. When we originally started talking about that program in 2008, and saying that we needed 3 years of follow-up, in-home follow-up and connections, it's like, that's too expensive. That's never going to be. No way, no way, no way, no way. Looking at me with a abject horror on their faces at the idea we can never afford that. Now they're realizing you can't afford not to.
Exactly.
And so again, and I started the conversations about that program again in 2008. Now in October of 2016, it's mandatory that programs such as ours have the program I wanted anyhow. So they're going to make me do what I asked for, which I'm okay with. So we're winning little steps.
Well, I see
over long periods of time.
There is some treatments now, or some medication that's non-addictive to help eliminate the cravings for this. You know, are we still doing the methadone, the Suboxone?
Methadone, yes, is still prescribed, and Suboxone, yes, those things are still out there. Again, we have a firm belief in the medical community people should have choice, and some of their choices are that. I find, you know, again, I have my own beliefs about methadone, and one of them is specifically with young people, is that you know, having to go somewhere to get that every day is not really the way that you want to build your life around. You can't go on a cruise on methadone. It limits. And I
But
think that
isn't
we're
that-
building more and more viable options,
But
and
is
it should be.
that also addictive to
Well,
them?
there are people that abuse methadone.
I see.
And so it's one of the things that, again, making choices and identifying the medication based on the individual rather than one hat fits all kinds of treatment, which is we get in the habit of doing that. It's like the miracle drug cure at the time, and that everybody needs to be on it. And so there are people that that's perfectly appropriate for, and that it works for them, and then it can work for them long term, and it can be appropriately dosed, and that's nifty. I would be more along the lines that if, having for myself a monthly injection so that I only have to go to the doctor once a month, get an injection,
Yeah.
done with it. That fits my lifestyle more. So I would look at the idea that would makes much more sense to me personally. And that being able, when somebody does seek treatment, is making those decisions, that they have all the options in front of them, and that they be able to make a decision based on what their goals are, what works for them best, what long-term maintenance looks like versus short-term maintenance, so that they can make decisions.
Sure.
And that should be a family decision, because you don't necessarily want to drive your child to the methadone clinic every morning at 6 a.m.
Now,
before school.
The shot, is it something that they have to do all forever?
No.
No.
And again, the process, and I know people that have had, that have come through, I guess you could say, the treatment, heroin addicts specifically, that have been clean for 30 years or more. So, I mean, but there does come to a point where you're able to stabilize long enough that once you've done the detox, and then once you start doing the behavior part of it, because first you do have a physical addiction, and then the rest of that is behavioral patterns, lifestyle cravings, and then a predisposition to that if you do need medication for a viable reason, like surgery or something, your brain's kind of pre-wired to want to relapse and say, hey, I remember that stuff. That stuff was cool. Let's go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is something to be cognizant of for the rest of your life, but it shouldn't impede your functioning for the rest of your life.
So what do they do if they have to have
Have discussions. And have real discussions about options for pain. Have real discussions about, do I really need the morphine? How long? Should I be allowed to have my own little button? Or not? Because we do have people that, again, if you have somebody that's 15 years old, and they receive treatment and they can be clean for 8-9 years, well, pregnancy, labor and delivery, possibly a C-section, different kinds of accidents, things happen.
Sure.
And for instance, myself that gets a tooth pulled, and I don't have a history. I don't even like the feel of opiates. I don't like them.
Yeah.
So but again, here's your 30-day supply.
Yeah.
There are situations that you need. I had a hysterectomy. I, again, prescribed opiate medication. I took one and didn't take the rest of them because I don't like the way it feels. I don't like thinking and then having your hand move later. That's annoying to me. But we need to be able to make sure that those, I guess you could say, all the options are laid out on the table, and that people can make judgments on what they want based on, again, what works for them. And looking at making sure that those options are honestly done, rather than this is what we do, this is what's most convenient, this is what's most readily available, this is the most cost effective over a long term, because not treating effectively is even more costly, especially when you have adolescents, because 15-year-old girl who has a boyfriend that's also using, the chances of having a drug-exposed pregnancy are starting to go up. And that's one of the things we don't want, because then that becomes very expensive.
Yep. This one time I had my daughter, and I thought, she's messing up. So I'm going to take it back to the hospital. Maybe they can refer her to, treatment or whatever. So I took her to Hurley. And I'm pissed off at her. So I'm outside the room, and she kept saying, Daddy, come in the room, And I'm like, no, I don't like what you're doing. I'm thinking everything is behavioral, you're causing this. It's in your hands, Well, on the way home, I don't like to put my dirty laundry out there, but I think the more we can be honest, I think it's better off for the next person or somebody that hears me, they can, wow.
And that's extremely important. I think that that's one of the reasons why I appreciate, what you've been doing, is that the typical response is to be overwhelmed, angry, frustrated, feeling guilty, feeling shame, and then going back into head in the sand.
Yeah.
And that's going back to not my family. I don't know anything about this, and then turn around and being judgmental about others and pretending, and even changing the story. I've heard, and again, heroin's not new. I mean, I've heard people that talk about, oh, my brother just went to sleep one night and never woke up, and I think the first person that I knew personally that died of a heroin addict, I was in junior high, and this was somebody that I was friends with. And listening to sort of people talking about that situation, and again, it goes back to, oh, well, they just, they fell asleep and never woke back up, thinking, we
That's
need to be.
Yeah.
That's not how that happens when you're 13.
Right.
So being able to be more vocal, and luckily my mother was vocal, and have people in the family that were, and being able to say, this is, there was and again, it was with psychedelics, but there was a person who used to hang out at the local Hardee's where I grew up, and he used to buy coffee for Barbie and Ken. And people would say crazy. And my mom, whether it was true or not, I don't know, because she was known to add some things as a learning lesson, was saying, I went to high school with him. He was top 10 student. Took acid one day, lost his luggage. Now he's buying coffee for Ken. And, so that's what happens when you take acid.
Is that the guy who was on the bike or whatever?
No, different guy. Same town, different guy. It was a small farming community. There wasn't a lot else to do. But yeah, and growing up later, that was when I was 6th, 7th grade. Growing up later, when I was in like 8th, 9th grade, and somebody offering you, all I could think of was, I am not spending the rest of my life buying Ken coffee. Okay,
Yeah.
My Barbies do not need soft drinks or
Yeah.
anything. And being able to be honest and open and talking about it and sharing that knowledge and sharing experiences and pain and samples. We live in a culture now where I think it's everybody sits around the table and looks at separate phone screens. We don't have conversations.
Exactly.
We don't have that. It used to be where we're in each other's neighbor's business. We don't have that kind of community, I want to say policing, let's say it.
Yeah.
And so that we don't have
went away
those
from
samples.
the village.
Right, we have. And to be able to say, this is
bad.
what happened to the kid around the block, or this,
Sure.
and remind your children, we're not going to ignore that.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to support each other. We don't want to be judgmental, but make sure we keep it honest. So that we're able, again, to rebuild that village, because these are our children, and they're not just those people or their children, they're our children.
Exactly.
They're our young people.
That's how I feel too. We need to go back to being a village and looking out for one another, and we need more love back in our lives. I was raised that your neighbor was like part of your family. That's how we were.
Yes.
Now it's like you live next door to somebody, you don't even know their first name. Right. You're lucky to get a wave every now and then as you're pulling in, hello there.
Right.
But I know with my children too, it's very hard for us to talk about certain things, sex, drugs, and all these things. But, I tell my wife all the time, I say, listen, you just keep talking. I don't care if they're listening or not. But what happens, hopefully, when they get to that crossroads, they say, oh, I remember my mom talking about this, or I remember my dad saying something about this, because let's face it, we all went, we're all the same. We all grew up in the same way. Everything experiences. I don't care what time factor or what generation it was, these different things. The bullying, all these different things, drugs, alcohol, whether you're popular or whether you're not, whether you're a jock or,
Some things never change.
Some things, they don't. But that's the whole thing is, I think we've gotten to the point, like you said, if we sit at the same table and we're eating, everybody's got their phones out. There's not that communication in family anymore. So it's upon us. I took my kids and my family, we went on a cruise, and it was so nice because they couldn't use their phones. And for the first time in years, I would say, we sat down at the table. They were forced to have conversation, and we had a great time.
Right.
It's like they're discovering who I really am and who their mom is, and we're discovering who they are, as young people.
Right.
And it was a great thing. And I think we get so wrapped up with being busy and stuff that we forget what's really important. And our children are our biggest investment. Our biggest investment. And as a parent, growing up, I made a lot of mistakes. I did things that I don't want my kids to experience.
Right.
But that's, I think, through our experiences, that's how we become who we are.
And it's interesting that you said that, because I grew up with a fairly large family in a fairly small town, and had aunts and uncles and older cousins, and stories were one of the ways in which we were taught things. And so my grandmother would tell stories about when she was growing up and things that would happen, typically about how her big issue with all of her daughters and granddaughters was, please don't get pregnant. And so there are many stories about how you could accidentally get pregnant. Accidentally. When you're least expecting it. But that was her frame of reference, and about how to protect yourself. What are some of the things that you need to look out for to keep yourself safe as a young woman, out on dates or just out in general? My mother was part of the 60s generation. She graduated from high school in 65. My uncle in 67 and my aunt in 69, and then older cousins. So they talked more about the drug culture. They shared more. My uncle had been in Vietnam and had come back with a heroin addiction. He shared very honestly that experience, that process. That was part of that. We were open and honest and direct, and knowing if anybody ever asks you about this, if anybody ever talks to you about this, please go to this uncle or that aunt or this cousin, or so that you always have somebody to talk to. You always have somebody to question. You always have somebody. And again, having all these cousins and all these family in this fairly small town where everybody knew each other. The secretary from our church was across the street. She would call my mother at work. If anybody came by the house, I remember one of my older cousins came by, and he was a teenager, and pulled into the driveway and was doing something with the grass. She called my mother at work to tell me that there's some boy with a car at your house. Yeah. So I got a phone call. Who is that? And it's like, well, he's mowing the lawn, and fixing something. It was laying anyhow. But we used to police each other, and as families, we would stay involved in each other's life and use those stories as an example. I don't think we do that a lot. We allow television. We allow again the devices. We allow strangers to tell those stories and to share those experiences that help direct life choices, rather than the people that you're surrounded with, your family, your neighbors, people involved with your church and in education, to tell those stories and help direct. And stories are very, very popular. And when you look at, I don't even turn the TV on anymore half the time. I'm very selective. I turn it on to watch a program and turn it off when it's done. And just because some of the stories that are available, and some of those that really glorify the drug culture, really glorify, and I find that disturbing.
I find myself today, even young girls, that I come across. I used to tell my daughter all the time, boys are dogs. Now I have two young men, okay, and I tell them the same thing. A lot of times, us men, when we're going through the teenage years, that little head is talking, and we're not listening to the big head, right. And it's just all about sex, and it's not really about
hormones are real, right?
Yeah. Yep. My mom,
and it's actually one of the things that's interesting is that that's an automatic response system. So, for instance, I don't know if you've ever saw the movie A Theory of Everything. It's the story of Stephen Hawking's. He had Lou Gehrig's disease and was in a wheelchair and did not have muscle control over his hands or part of his body, but he could still father children because that's an automatic different. Yeah. So again, when you think about this really, really real concern, that you have to have really, really direct conversations with, say, this is going to get you in trouble, and it is an automatic response system, much like breathing, unfortunately. And so that's different set of process. It's not like your hand where you lift it up, and so having control, despite what your body's responding to, is very necessary conversation. And those are the things too that I'm concerned with. When I think about the number of young people that are taking opiates, and I look at, I used to say partial conversations, and saying, you need to find a way to control these urges. You need to find a way to control this. Well, the drugs will do that. And so if you have judgments about this, or your interactions or social interactions are limited to Facebook or I know they're not doing it on Facebook anymore, but I'm old, so I Instagram, Twitter, something. There's somewhere and some social media. If that's where your conversations, that's your social network is built on, well, there's feelings of loneliness, feelings of isolation, and sitting at home and nodding out on these somehow seems like a viable solution to being able to process that. That to me scares me more than anything else, is that we're not teaching people how to overcome again, anxiety or loneliness, not building community groups, not building peer groups in a way so that there's healthy ways to engage with people. I'm really wondering what's going to happen if we don't start reaching out and start pulling the child out of the bedroom and off the computer and out from behind the TV and saying, you have to learn how to engage with other kids. You have to learn how to work through this stuff. Exactly. You have to learn how to get over being shy and ask that girl to dance without being drunk. These are things that are going to have to happen so that you can have real relationships. Otherwise, they're going to continue to be that crutch. And when it comes to young adolescents and adolescents, I think that's probably how they're injured, other than sports injuries, probably how they're introduced to that the most, because it does work to resolve those issues.
Yeah. I was watching this show, and it was talking about Armageddon. Mm-hmm. And the big thing they were talking about, when it came to drugs, they says the devil gets a hold of you because your brain is not thinking. Right. You're using something that your brain's not really operating, and that's how the devil gets a hold of you. And that's why it's so hard sometimes to get off the drugs. I don't preach or whatever, but I have my own personal relationship with God, and that's as far as we need to go. Right. But I think a lot of times that we get sidetracked, and because we're in pain and we get into the drugs and stuff, and there's nothing stronger than the devil but God. You have to get God in your life. That's going to help you, hopefully.
And I think that the spiritual component's very important. The 12 steps is essentially, when you read that, is a spiritual practice, and being able to look at having a spiritual practice. I actually, one of the things I find, when you talk about drugs or alcohol or any of these, and that people say, well, I'm stressed out. It's like, well, so do I. I get stressed too. I just prefer meditation to inebriation, as part of that process. So that's one of the things to practice, is being able to, especially for recovery, it requires hope. And that's a spiritual aspect, faith. And that looking at the idea that I think that we also need to really push not only the doctors and neighbors, but we also really need to push our faith-based leaders into looking at stepping back away from some of the prejudice and stigma against, I guess you could say, use as sin, and looking at this as saying, now this is our opportunity to be able to help somebody resolve this, let this come through, and looking at this in a more, as I guess you could say, very good spiritual practices. There's a program that she just got her 501c3 in town. It's called Serenity House. And one of the things that she looks is to alternative healing practices to be able to support sustained recovery. And so those are the things I absolutely love to see. I love to see unique and creative ways in which people are coming out and saying, now that you've gotten through the first 30 days of withdrawal and detox, here we have where Reiki or acupuncture or some of these other alternative healing practices could come into play. What about prayer? What about meditation? What about chakra dances and yoga as a part of this process so that you can find a way to connect, not only connect with others, connect to a higher power, connect to the larger community, and work through, again, learning to handle stress, learning to handle anxiety.
After I lost Briona, I was in a world of depression. My whole body ached. And I think about 2 or 3 months after she died, I'd go a week where I didn't shower, I didn't shave. I just, my whole body ached. Absolutely. It was hard to get out of bed. That my wife, bless her heart, she's like, honey, I don't know what you need to do, but please go get some help, So I turned to a therapist, and the therapy, I think we did therapy for about 2 months, and she says, I think you need to see the psychiatrist. You need to sleep, that might help. Well, seeing the psychiatrist, within 4 months, I'm on 4 or 5 different medications at this point. It started with the sleeping pill, then it went to something else and something else. But at that point, he's like, well, how's this working out for you? I says, I'm still depressed. Now I'm groggy. I still feel like shit, He's like, well, maybe we need to change something. I says, Doc, maybe I just need to heal, by feeling. I lost my child.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'm just supposed to go through this, He said, well, I don't know why you came to see me. I said, I know, I don't know why I came to see you, but I know I'm not coming back, And I just, at that point, I put it in God's hands. I said, God, please help me get through this, And God does show you little miracles if you look, Briona, on her 18th birthday, we went out to the cemetery, and at the last Christmas, I gave her this dolphin necklace. And when we got to the cemetery, it was like 6:30 or so, the sun is just, it's going down, and the moon is just lit so bright. And it was like a spotlight on this cloud, and the cloud was a dolphin.
Awesome.
And it was like, okay, God, I got you, I got you, And really, am I over my depression? I still get depressed, I still get depressed, but I know what I need to do, It's all right to feel. It's all right to go through the pain, And, I still think, well, what if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? I did the best I could with what I knew. I didn't know the things that I know now back then, But I forced myself to learn, and that I hope, with me learning, and talking to specialists like you and other doctors and stuff, that I can help some other families.
Right.
And that's why, we do the things that I do.
And that again, and I really, really appreciate you doing that. And
thank you,
it's been, as you said, it's been 5 years. And so looking at the idea that here we are 5 years later, and rather than going through the traditional path that others do, instead of just ignoring it and not opening up the wound, I really appreciate the fact that you're still yelling at the system and demanding some change.
Well,
because it's changing. It really is.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I can appreciate it. I know sometimes the system is very slow in getting there, but we're moving in the right directions. Right. Kristen, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you
really
for coming. I appreciate it.
And we're going to be doing a lot more things. Okay. You keep up your battle, and I'll keep up my battle.
I will continue to fight the power. Yeah.
Again, thank you for joining me today. Thanks for our listeners. Thank you for Briona, God, and remember that the louder the voice, the more that we're going to be heard, okay, in the proper way. We just got to keep communicating and reaching out, and hopefully together we will make a change. Again, thank you for listening. My name is Sam Jahari. We'll catch you next time.